This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hi, my name is Pamela Fuselli, and I'm the host of Popping the Bubble Wrap. Are you the person in your family who worries about the safety of others, about buying safety products and using them? Are you yelling, "Yes, that's me"? This is the podcast for you. Raising a child or children can be a hair-raising undertaking, and keeping them safe is a priority. Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast explores what you really need to think about as a parent or caregiver, and provides easy tips on prevention strategies. No bubble wrap here, though. One of the most wonderful things about having children is watching their unbridled curiosity about the world around them. As a parent, though, this wonder comes with an equal dose of worry about hazards our children might come across, especially the very young children who are vulnerable and haven't developed their motor skills that play a key role in issues like choking, strangulation, and suffocation. There are questions about what should be in a crib, what to do with window blind cords, which foods are appropriate at certain ages. So in this episode, we'll discuss strategies for removing and mitigating these hazards in the home and hear about some experience from our parents. Joining me today are Lillian, Lauren, and Reem. I'm so happy you could join me for this episode of Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks.
So what are the kinds of foods that your kids like, but you don't let them eat, or at certain stages, what you have sort of introduced to them because you have been afraid of them, sort of choking on their food? How you look at food like carrots and hot dogs have probably changed from before you had kids till when after you've had kids. So Lauren, maybe I'll start with you. What's been your experience? You have one young child and one on the way, right?
Yes. So my son is just over 2 years old. So he's a pretty independent eater at this point and eats just about everything. I think the real fearful stage is gone for me, but at the same time, people kind of give him things and he takes things without me being able to maybe monitor the modifications, those foods like you mentioned, like carrots and hot dogs and that kind of thing. I don't know who introduced this to him, but he loves ice with his water.
Oh, yeah.
And so he's also drinking from an open cup. So the fact that he wants ice cubes, that's a no-go for me, because that's just that scares me in terms of choking, of course. So yeah, we try to do some modifications for those really dangerous foods. But again, we're he's at daycare, he's at grandma and grandpa's, you don't know what's going on. They're not as educated maybe as us as parents or at least for myself, I'm constantly looking that stuff up and trying to figure out how to make things safe for my kid. But I would say I'm a little bit more relaxed now that I know he has confidence in chewing and eating and swallowing and the mechanics are down.
Right. And you hit on a really important point about, what you do in your own home versus what they do when they're in daycare or at someone else's home who might not be, so aware of the dangers. And, as they grow, it changes very rapidly what they can or should eat and what they can't eat, right? So when you talk about, carrots or hot dogs and things like that, I mean, there's some that are not recommended absolutely for really young kids, but others like hot dogs, if you cut them in a certain way, it eliminates the real hazard for that food. Lillian, I saw you nodding when Lauren talked about the ice issue. Is that something that you've faced as well with your kids?
My kids love sucking on ice. I don't know what it is. Is it the cold? Is it the roundness of ice? Like, no idea. Maybe it's the flavoring from the drinks, but they love ice. The bigger concern for us was grapes. And you would never think about that as an adult because grapes are fruit. It's wonderful. But my mom introduced fancy grapes, these muscat grapes that are the perfect size to block an airway. They're not like the big juicy red ones where it's hard to get lodged because it's so large they can't just swallow, they have to chew it. These perfect size marble grapes, my kid has choked on before because my mom also introduced peeling grapes. So they're slippery and slidey in the mouth, and they can just slide down there, and the younger one starts coughing, and we have to help him dislodge it because he was a bit young. So I totally understand where you're coming from, Lauren. Ice, grapes, like those two seem to go hand in hand with children.
Yeah, and cutting the grapes are a good way to stop that from happening. But I do love those Muscat grapes. I have to say, I've tried them myself. Reem, have you had some experiences around, or what sort of foods are you worried about when you're feeding your kids?
Yeah, so I've got a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. And so for me, the challenge is the 3-year-old can eat certain things sometimes. And then the 18-month-old, of course, wants it. So things like raisins that I know my 3-year-old can eat. Mm-hmm. My 18-month-old doesn't quite have molars, and she definitely stuffs her face. That's a big problem for me, is the stuffing. She's in that phase where she'll just...
Yep.
Big, bunch of stuff. And she has choked, she gags it out really well. But yeah, I'm just scared that she's going to stuff something in her mouth and get stuck in her airway. So that for me is a big one. But yeah, my kids love grapes, and now they don't want them cut. They'll tantrum if I cut them. So I have to just be like, bite it. And then they'll just bite it. And I'm like, okay, I'm coaching them through eating grapes so that they don't just stuff it in their mouth.
Yeah, a similar kind of scenario is with small toys and small pieces of, that kids that are older, they're fine with, but the younger kids, they put everything in their mouth, right? That's how they explore the world. So one of the things that I learned that I think is really handy, you can buy choking tubes. So you can buy a tube that is big enough, the opening's big enough. If it fits through there, it's a choking hazard. But everybody has a tool in their house that will help them. And that's a toilet paper roll. So a toilet paper roll is, if it fits in there, it's a choking hazard. So I was really excited to hear that, because it was a tool that you didn't have to go out and buy, that you could try that out with. I wanted to talk a little bit about cribs as well, because that, when we think about the suffocation issues in a crib, and it looks so beautiful when it's got the crib bumper pads and the stuffed animals and the quilts and all that kind of stuff. But, we totally recommend, as does, Health Canada and the Canadian Pediatric Society, is that you don't have anything in the crib when kids are really young, because when I talked about that, the motor skill development, they can't roll out of or off of something that is blocking them. So what is your approach? Reem, maybe I'll start with you. What's your approach to the crib? Is that something that you've done?
Oh yeah, I was very scared with the crib initially. I also knew a lot about safe sleep just from my workplace. And so, I was very adamant, and my husband didn't quite understand. He didn't know any of that. So he learned a lot from that process. But yeah, we just did, a sleeper and a sleep sacks. And he was like, why are we buying all these sleep sacks? And I'm like, because we can't use a blanket. And when we had a newborn, we had the bassinet next to our bed, and there was a window there. So there's a cold draft, but we couldn't fit the bassinet on the other side. So it was kind of awkward, but I had to use a thick sleep sack because that was the only way to keep the baby warm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think sleep sacks were definitely a must initially. And then I didn't introduce a blanket until my kid was in toddler daycare, because they requested a blanket, and I was like, okay, fine, now I'll introduce it. So I kind of waited a little longer, and also because she just didn't know any different. So
yeah, right. Lauren, what's your approach, or have you, and I guess when you talked about, you going to stay at grandparents' place, that's one of the things where, grandparents may not be aware of this change in recommendation.
That's exactly what I was thinking as Reem was talking, the grandparent issue. My dad in particular had an issue with the sleep sack. And every time my son would stay over, he's like, when's he going to stop wearing that dress to bed? When's he going to stop wearing that dress to bed? I was like, it's a safety thing. It's also so handy for other reasons, not safety related. But we were definitely on the sleep sack train until my son learned to take it off, and then
Right.
we have to adjust. But personally, I had a little bit of a scare. So my son was only a few months old, and we had, same as you, Reem, we had the bassinet beside the bed. I think his sleep sack just hanging over the edge, and he was really young, obviously. So I put him in his bassinet so I could go to the bathroom. I'm sure you can both relate to that. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this is where he sleeps. This is a safe place to put him while I go to the bathroom for 30 seconds. So go to the bathroom, come back. He had somehow managed to pull the sleep sack down from the side, and it was over his face, and he's squirming. And even talking about it now just terrifies me. So that was like eye opener, rude awakening. They're little, they can't manage to get anything off of their face. And I thought I was doing everything right by putting him in a safe, spot while he was unsupervised, and it just happens very quickly. So I think that's something else that I really appreciate is, at the best of times, we try to do everything right. But then when, we're just trying to do something quickly or out of the ordinary, maybe we have to try to keep that stuff in mind too, because they're quick, even as little infants.
They are quick, way quicker than we give them credit for a lot of times, right? And of course, the one thing you didn't want them to touch is what they will touch, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Lillian, you have, an experience with your children getting a bit older. Did you have the same approach with the cribs? And I guess with the older ones too. I mean, it's where you put your crib as well as what you put in it.
It's very true. I have a 3 and a 6-year-old. They're both boys, so they fight a lot. But when the 6-year-old was a baby and when he was an infant, we knew that back is best, and we would put him on his back. But he turned over and was rolling over onto his side and onto his tummy to sleep at like 2 weeks old. And so we were freaked out because we were scared he was going to just keep his face forward and not know how to just turn his little head. So we kept flipping him back over every time he did it. And it was disruptive to his sleep. And because he had that bad habit, he would also, eventually he would curl up into like a rabbit ball, and his bum would be in the air and his face would be down into the crib mattress. And that's how we slept. And it was the strangest thing ever, because as an adult, you would never sleep like that, but that's how we chose to sleep. So we actually didn't know when to introduce a pillow. And that was something we still don't know exactly when and how we should introduce it to the baby. The older one decided that it was okay to share stuffies with his little brother when he was 6 months old. So we gave him some friends to play with in his bed. And the baby took to putting his face into the stuffed animals because it smelled like his brother, for security. But of course, that's a suffocation hazard. So we'd have to remove it slowly. And it was such a production. But that awareness is not there for children, and they sleep in the same room. And there's only so much you can do to watch them, right? The older one will have different things in his bed. He has blankets, he has friends, whereas the baby has nothing. So it's a fine balancing act sometimes.
It is. And you don't want to impact their relationship or his, wanting to share, because that's sometimes not what they want to do, right? With their things, they want to keep them to themselves. So, you want to encourage that, but at certain times. But I think all of this just demonstrates so well how at certain ages things can be really hazardous, and by the time they're 6, they've changed over, and that isn't something that we're concerned about. So the other thing that we get a lot of questions on, I'd be really interested to hear what your experience has been around window blind cords. And now they're making them without blind cords at all. They're self-raising and lowering. But what kind of strategies, if you have blinds in your house, have you used around the blind cords? And I'll just, Lauren, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So been a pretty big concern for us. So we try to hang them up where possible. We do have a few windows that have the self-raising and lowering, which is honestly the best invention ever. Gives, I think, all parents a lot of peace of mind, and they just look nicer too, because I don't know how people keep those things untangled. But yeah, so definitely that was something we tried to mitigate. And then another thing that didn't really cross my mind, we have a couch and then blinds behind it. My son would climb up on the couch and he would put it in his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's those little tabs at the end of some of the blind cords. And so then that to me was a choking hazard on top of a strangulation hazard. So trying to make sure those ones were always up. And, maybe someday we'll have all of our window coverings will be the self-raising and lowering ones.
Yeah, they sell those cleats that you can kind of wrap the cord around, but you're right, they get tangled, whether they're hanging or whether you've wrapped them in the cleats. Reem, you're nodding. You've had this experience too.
In my parents' homes is where I worry most, like my parents and the in-laws, because they have homes and they're older, and so they do have the regular blinds. Okay. We live in a new condo that was just built, and so they had to do the new regulations, and so I'm less worried at home.
Okay.
They've used the cord, but it's like connected to a plastic, and it's like there's no way they can detach it.
Right.
I feel safe here, but yeah, at the grandparents, there's just like fair game for anything. So I'm always on the lookout in case they're trying to grab it or climb it or do something silly with it.
Yeah. Lillian, what about you? With the boys sharing a room, are they near a window? So does the window have a blind, or have you run into this issue too?
We have curtains in our house.
Okay.
So it hasn't really been a problem for us per se. It's more at my mom's house. So she has the older style blinds where you pull the string and then it zits up.
Right.
My kids like to not so much hang on the blinds or touch them. They like to hit the string because of that little weight on the bottom. It flicks back and forth. So it's a game to them. They're like cats, right? They just hit it back and forth. So that became a problem because the younger one doesn't know how to move his head out of the way when the rope comes swinging back over. And because it's a loop, it's very easy to get caught around.
Caught around. Yeah, exactly. I was thinking exactly the same thing just before you said cats. I was thinking about cats and dogs and them playing with it. You can cut that loop and then at least it's separate and it wouldn't be a choking hazard or a strangulation hazard. So that's one tip that maybe you can talk to your parents. It is their house before you go cutting their blind strings.
Oh, that's a great tip. I never thought about that.
Well, thank you so much. That just has flown by our time to have a conversation about this. And I think for those really young kids and the types of ages that your children are, these issues are so important. And I know that, listening to you, so many people have the same experience and will really appreciate you sharing your stories and ways to mitigate and keep those hazards away until they're a bit older. So thanks all of you for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Want to find out more prevention tips? Visit parachute.ca and click on Injury Topics. That's parachute.ca and click on Injury Topics.
It's time to open your parachute.
Dr. Emilié Beaulieu is a general pediatrician at the CHU de Quebec. Dr. Beaulieu is also an assistant professor at the Department of Pediatrics at Laval University and an associated researcher at the Center of Research at the CHU de Quebec. Welcome, Emily. I'm so glad that you could join us today.
Thank you.
You heard what the parents were talking about in terms of their concerns about, choking on foods, window blind cords, bumpers and pillows in cribs and things like that. What do you see as a physician, and you obviously as a parent must be familiar with some of these issues? What are your concerns, and are these the top ones that you see?
Yeah, so I would say all of these are very, very common concerns that we discuss with parents and, that I've experienced myself. I think the main message that I would want to give parents is that it can become overwhelming very quickly. The amount of things that you need to know as a parent. And I have friends that told me, that they felt like everything is a hazard for a child between 0 and 2-3 years old. So it's the main thing that I make sure to discuss with parents is, where do you go to find the right information? And so there are so many blogs, Facebook pages, name it. You can really, really lose yourself. And I'm glad that we're doing this podcast. And I always mention Parachute website, because if you have a question, you go on Parachute's website, everything you need to know is up to date. So that is a very important information. And I'll give you an example. Listening to the parents, the guest parents that we just heard. Honestly, Ice Cube was not on the top of my list as a choking hazard.
Mine neither.
So I was kind of surprised. So what did I do? I Googled it, right? Oh my, so many blogs. Some says it is, some says it's not. I even read an article that was, like a local article. And it was saying, if your child is choking on an ice cube, don't worry. Just pour just pour hot water down their throat and it's going to melt. And I'm like, yeah, this is surely not the best advice. So yeah, it can get overwhelming very quickly. And so my advice for ice cubes are, it can easily be crushed, right? So you can give them something like a homemade slush, and it will be fine. So bottom line, with food, it's a matter of how you prepare the food, how you cut. So parents talked about grapes and hot dogs and any food with a similar rounded shape. You need to slice lengthwise, right? So, and to me, the big no-no is popcorn. There's really nothing you can do about it. You cannot really prepare it differently. And if a child choke on it, what we see is that it can go into the lungs, right? And that's very dangerous. So popcorn should be avoided for children at least younger than 5 years old. So yeah, that's important.
You think of us as adults. I mean, I've choked on popcorn myself. Like it is that kind of food that, if you breathe the wrong way when you have a piece of popcorn in your mouth, it gets sucked down into your throat and the little pieces get stuck places. So, you touched on, I think, something that's really probably front of mind for parents, especially first-time parents, is the overwhelming number of things that they never thought that they needed to worry about. Right from the cribs and the things that they're being given, like bumper pads and pillows and stuffed animals and things like that. And I found it interesting that most of the parents that we talked to knew about, nothing in the crib. But there is this urge, I think, to make the crib look nice and to match the decor and all that kind of thing. What kind of conversations do you have with the parents that you see as a physician?
So what we see is parents will endorse whatever injury prevention messages that we give them, especially when they're going back home with their new baby. But what we see is really pressure from the family, right? Like the grandmother that bought this thing for the crib, and you don't want to say, well, this is not what is recommended. So sometimes that's a difficult conversation for parents to have. And that is also something that I experienced myself. So, it's difficult as parents. You need to educate yourself, but you also need to educate people around you, like grandparents. And it's especially difficult when they get defensive, right? And so I think it's important just to, once again, let people around you know, like, hey, these are great resources that you could check to make sure that you're you are also prepared for the new baby to come. And so maybe this way the message, they will listen to the resource and not the parents. So that's something that we often see. Another kind of new trend is and that was not discussed by the guest parents, was the baby-led weaning and choking hazard. So I did my homework. I checked all the studies, and really what the literature is showing us is that a baby-led approach, so introducing solid food right from the beginning versus traditional food introduction, it doesn't seem to increase the risk of choking. But in my experience and many of my colleagues, we seem to see more choking these days on raw carrots, different foods. So my hypothesis about that is, even if you're introducing solid food, doesn't mean that you don't need to think about how you're gonna prepare the food and, cut it in a way that, yes, your baby can grab it on his own, but will be still safe. So parents, I feel, can get, again, overwhelmed by so many different trends in parenting, but we need to stick with the very, very basic messages, and that's one of them.
And you are also a parent as well as a physician. Were there any surprises to you as a parent as you actually experienced this, changes in development as your children, were born and grew, in the first couple of years?
Yeah. So I feel like parents are kind of prepared for the first years, and that's great because, an infant, the first year is very difficult. Infants are super vulnerable. So you need to, think about anything that could happen. But after that, sometimes it's difficult for parents to remember that there are some hazards around choking, suffocation, and also what we call strangulation. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I discuss with parents and friends also. For example, scarves. We don't really see them around anymore, so that's a good thing. It's difficult for children to wear anyway. And so neck warmer is a much better choice. But anything like, window blind cords, scarves, it could get stuck in a car, a door, in a bus door, car doors. We've seen farm machinery. So these are really hazards that can be prevented. So it's difficult sometimes to, make sure that you continue to evolve in your injury prevention reading with as your child grow. So that's something that I often see. And the other important thing is bicycle helmet. So how many kids they go on their bike to the park, and once they get there, they keep their helmet on, right? But that's kind of a dangerous thing because it could get stuck. There could be branches from a tree or a pin or something, and that's a cause for strangulation. So all these different tips, but I guess in my experience is you need to educate yourself and then find a balanced approach to make sure that you know enough and you're able to prioritize. Otherwise, you can very quickly get
overwhelmed.
Yeah, overwhelmed, stress. You can get sometimes angry at others in your surrounding because they don't know as much as you. But as long as you're able to prioritize and, performance parenting is a big thing right now. So a balanced approach is very important.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been really interesting talking to you from both, your professional hat on, but also as a parent and the understanding about how many things that parents need to worry about when their kids are really young, and then the changes as they develop and how they can stop worrying about some things, and then there's new and different hazards for their kids. So thanks so much for joining me, Emily. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Popping the Bubble Wrap is a podcast of Parachute, Canada's national injury prevention charity, whose mission is for Canadians to live long lives to the fullest by preventing serious and fatal injuries. We release episodes every 2 weeks. On the next episode, we'll be talking about all-terrain vehicles, or ATV safety. Help us reach parents and caregivers by sharing this link with your friends and family and giving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Popping the Bubble Wrap is produced for Parachute by Story Studio Network and Eye Contact Productions.
This is Story Studio Network.